Hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Murphy. I'm an associate professor at the Hillary Rodham Clinton School of Law at Swansea University, and I'm making this very brief video just to introduce myself to you as one of the members of the teaching staff at Swansea, and to introduce you to some materials that I've produced, some sample materials I've produced to give you some insight into what it might be like to study law at university. The focus of these materials is on the basic structures and features of the legal system of England and Wales. And so if you do go on to study law, as well as studying for substantive subjects like contract law and public law, the law of torts, the law of property, it's also really important that you get an insight into the structures that underpin that law. How is law made? What is law? And how do the institutions and people of the legal system of England and Wales help to shape, influence, implement, and interpret that law? So I hope you find the materials useful. They're not meant to be an exhaustive treatment of the areas that they cover, but rather just a very brief flavour of the sorts of issues, the sorts of thinking and the sorts of approach that you might take if you do go on to study law at university.
Hello and welcome to this podcast on the legal system of England and Wales with Dr. Ryan Murphy. And today what I wanted to talk to you about was the impact of law and legal systems on my life, and indeed on your lives. And we could take that at a very, very grand level and talk about our human rights. We could talk about fundamental freedoms. We can talk about our property rights. We can talk about all sorts of grand things that law does and that law and the legal system facilitates. We could talk about the relationship that we have with the state, with the government, and with the police. We could talk about the impact that law has on the relationship between states, between countries, between sovereign bodies. But what I want to do instead is to talk to you a little bit, or to encourage you to think a little bit about the very pervasive nature of law, how law is everywhere and impacts on all of our lives, even in our everyday activities. And what I wanted to talk to you about in particular was one of my favourite things, and that's coffee. And what I want us to do, and what I want you to consider, is how does coffee get from bean to cup, and how does law regulate that journey from bean to cup? And just by looking at something as simple as to how law regulates how I get my daily fix of coffee will, I hope, let you realise the pervasive nature of law, how law is everywhere and influences every single aspect of human life. And so what I want you to do is to think about the types of law and of legal rules and of legal system that are involved in getting you that daily cup of coffee. And to help you do that, what I would like you to think about in particular is the journey of coffee. So it starts in the rainforests of South America, or it starts in the plains of Africa, or the hills of Africa. And what I want you to think about is what law and legal rules might govern how it gets from there to a supermarket or to a coffee shop, and then the sorts of laws and rules that govern how it gets to me. You can think about this in terms of the laws that might govern the way in which the coffee is sold, from producer to manufacturer to the end user, the person who drinks the coffee, and all of the different interactions along the way. You could think about the sorts of businesses that coffee is sold through before it makes it to my cup, and what sorts of law might govern those different sorts of business. Is the law as applied differently to very, very, very large employers, organisations, businesses, the supermarkets, to how it might apply to a bespoke, specialist, artisan coffee shop? And thinking about those things, thinking about how those businesses operate, how they form, and the influence that law has on that, will give you a further insight into the very, very real impact that law has on our lives. And what you might wish to do at this point, or after the following point, is to pause the recording and to really think about how many different relationships you can identify, how many different potential forms of law that you can think of that stem from this coffee. And then when we get down beyond the physical thing, the coffee, when we get down beyond the ways in which it's moved around, when we get through the ways in which businesses might deal with something as straightforward as coffee, we get to the people involved. So think about also the people involved in the journey of your coffee. Think about how legal rules, how legal systems might contribute to the lives of those people involved in the production and journey of my coffee. So as I say, what you might wish to do now is to pause the recording for a short while whilst you tackle those questions. And now that you've had some time to consider the substantive, the principles, the sorts of rules, the sorts of laws that might govern the transport of my coffee, what I want to do is to run through some of those substantive areas of law, and the role of the legal system, perhaps, in facilitating the sale of coffee. So let's start with two very, very basics of substantive areas of law, two fundamental areas of the law of England and Wales, and that's contract law and the law of torts. Now, those two things taken together might collectively be referred to as the law of obligations. Contract is, broadly speaking, the obligations that we take upon ourselves, and tort is the obligations that are placed upon us, largely because of our relationships with others. So let's take contract law first. If you think about that sale of coffee, if you think of the number of contracts that must be involved in getting that coffee from the bean to my cup, and I'm not just talking about that end contract, that final one where I go into the shop, I pick up the coffee, I take it to the cashier, I give the cashier the coffee, they say £2 or whatever, and I give over my money and they give me the coffee. Contracts exist all along that journey, whether that's the contracts for sale and production of the original coffee, whether it applies to the transport of that coffee, whether it applies to multiple intermediaries in the sale of that coffee. You know, there are probably dozens of contracts that govern the sale of my coffee. And then there's the law of tort. And the law of tort, in this instance, might apply to the duties that the manufacturer owes to me in the production of that coffee. And if you study law in any level of detail, you will come across this principle of the duties that we owe to others. And in particular, you might come across a case called Donahue. And in Donahue, you have the sale of some ginger beer, which was contaminated, allegedly, with the decomposing body of a snail. And the purpose of that case is to demonstrate or to bring home the fact that manufacturers owe duties of care. So a manufacturer owes a duty of care to a foreseeable end user. So that would be me in this case. So the manufacturer of that coffee owes me a duty of care to check and to ensure to the best of their ability that that coffee is not, for example, contaminated or laced with glass or something like that. If we move on, if we think of other substantive areas of law, there's company law, so the sort of company form that is chosen. So companies are legal personalities, so they are legal persons, which means that they can have contracts themselves, they can be subject to liabilities, all sorts of things. And think about the different company structures that might be involved in that journey of my coffee. Think also of intellectual property rights that might exist in the sale of my coffee. So for example, if I go in and I buy a branded product, I go in and I buy brand X of coffee, then there will be certain rights that exist and govern the use of their trademark, of their copyright, etc., etc. And think about all of the different companies, the brands, the intellectual property that might exist in the production of that coffee. If we think of consumer law, so consumer law will apply when someone is buying and selling in the capacity of a consumer. So the contract law applies more generally, and then a specific branch, if you like, of contract law is consumer law. What protections are given to me as a consumer when I go in and buy a product? It doesn't have to be coffee, it can be anything. What rights do I have as a consumer, as a matter of law, if those products are faulty, if they're not as described, or if they're of inferior quality? And then if we come down to towards the bottom of this slide, we can see property law. And so there'll be a whole range of law and legal principles governing the premises from which I buy the coffee, whether that's related to trespassers on that premises, whether it's related to the rights that that manufacturer or the supermarket has as a tenant. All of those things are governed by the law of real property. And then there's obviously personal property. At what point does the property transfer, the coffee transfer from the ownership of the shop into my hand? So these are just examples of the complexity of law and the impact of different areas of substantive law on the purchase of my daily cup of coffee. Here are some more. If we take the one that's in the news quite a lot, the extent to which big multinational corporations take advantage of tax law. So here's where we can see actually different areas of law interacting. So for example, a company operating out of Luxembourg with a roasting plant in Belgium and the shops that sell the coffee in the UK. To what extent can you use the tax rules that relate to those jurisdictions to maximize profit? And to some people, to exploit the tax system, and to other people's perspective would be to best utilize the existing tax rules. There's all sorts of legal rules around insurance law. So the premises in which you buy your coffee from will be insured. The ships and containers on which the coffee is brought over will be insured. And then there's international sales, so where different legal orders interact with each other. And so, for example, there are specific rules around shipping law. Very, 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 very well-established rules of shipping law in England and Wales. And other forms of transportation. Do the rules vary if you transport by land, air, or sea? What are the rules and laws that govern that journey and the different stages of the journey of my daily cup of coffee? And equally, as we can see, that we could go on in a never-ending web of interacting laws, rules, and laws. But for example, employment law. What are the duties that are owed to an employee from their employer when that employee is in the business of selling coffee? What sorts of health and safety rules apply for those who are visitors and those who work in those shops? And fundamentally, if any of these rules are broken, what is the sanction? Is the sanction only civil sanction? So can you sue them if they breach a duty of care to you? Can you sue them on the basis that they breached your contract? And when does behaviour tip over? Or when does a different approach by the law need to be taken and criminal sanctions are taken against a company or individual? So what I hope this very, very, very brief account shows you is that even the most straightforward of activities, purchasing a simple consumable drink, involves a very, very, very high number of interacting and intersecting rules. And you can probably think of even more of them. And in fact, I would encourage you to do that. Think next time you're out, the next time you're doing any of your day-to-day activities, think, what does the law do to facilitate, restrain this behaviour, this conduct, this activity? And it's only then, when you consciously think about the rules that govern our lives, that you see that sort of rich tapestry of law that exists. And what the legal system, to finish up on this point, will do, is the legal system allows for all of those principles of substantive law to be operationalized, that you can do things with the law. There's no point in having a law of contract if you can't enforce that contract through a court. And so you need to have mechanisms of enforcement, you need to have courts, you need to have all of this sort of legal system that facilitates the administration of the rules once they're made, and in fact also that has a hand in the creation of those rules in the first place. And so I do invite you to think about your day-to-day activities and how they are impacted on, influenced by, constrained by the law and the legal system. And before we move off completely from this point, what I would like to say in closing is that remember that we are governed by all sorts of rules that are non-legal rules. And just to treat law as the only form of important rule is to miss the point of rules. Rules operate on different levels of formality, they operate on different levels of rigidity. And laws are a particular form of rules, but they're not the only form of rules. So think about perhaps some of the other rules that might govern the use, sale, and consumption of my coffee. Well, that's societal expectations on me, that where I might drink coffee, when I might not drink coffee. You know, there's no rule to say that a pregnant woman can't drink coffee, but there might be societal pressure for her to reduce her caffeine intake for the well-being of her child. And so there are all sorts of other rules that govern our behavior. There are religious rules about consumption of certain foodstuffs, which might also govern our behavior, even though they fall short or they are not legal rules in England and Wales. And there are all sorts of other ones, like our family's expectations, our own ethics around globalization and fair trade will dictate our behavior. So legal rules are there to an extent to dictate our behavior, but we must look at them in the whole, with this whole other panoply of rules, non-legal rules, which also play a part in governing the way we live our lives.